I submitted our marriage registration at the city hall with my husband, believing that a happy married life awaited us. However, on our way back from the city hall, my husband knelt down and asked for a divorce. What? Wait a minute, I don't understand what you mean. Actually, I've fallen in love with someone else. I want to marry her. When I asked who the other person was, he said it was my sister. Sorry, it seems he prefers me over my plain sister. And just like that, my sister stole my husband. At first, I resented her, but I knew a secret about my husband. I planned to tell my sister about it when they returned from their honeymoon, aiming for a time when they were at their happiest. My name is Kitty Johnson. I'm a 32-year-old librarian currently working at a library. It has become a habit for me to drink at my regular spot on Friday nights after work. At 32, I'm still single and living with my parents. As my friends got married one after another, I began to feel increasingly anxious. But unable to change the situation, I grew sick of just getting older. One night, I drank more than usual. A man seated next to me struck up a conversation. You really know how to drink. May I join you? The man looked about as old as my father. I wished he was closer to my age, but since I was lonely drinking alone, I agreed. Sure, it was boring drinking alone anyway. I ended up sharing with this man all the grievances about work and my rush to get married that I couldn't tell anyone else. It sounds tough for women. He listened without judgment, nodding along. Perhaps because I was more talkative than usual due to the alcohol, but somehow I found him easy to talk to. After getting all my complaints off my chest, I suddenly came to my senses and apologized. I'm sorry for rambling so much to someone I just met. No worries at all. I like listening to people, so don't mind me. He smiled kindly, showing concern for me. But still, to carry so much stress, it looks like you don't have many people to talk to. If you'd like, shall we drink together again? I'll listen to your complaints. That's too kind. Really, next time I'll listen to your complaints if you have any. I'd be happy to join you again. That's how we ended up exchanging contact information and parted ways for the day. When I asked for his contact, I learned his name was Tony. Take care not to have a hangover. Yes, thank you. Although I usually felt lonely on my way home, that day was different. Being able to talk to someone helped me sort out my feelings, and I walked home with a lighter step. When I arrived home, the house was dark, as if everyone was asleep. I walked quietly down the hallway, trying not to wake my family, when I met my sister Mandy in front of the bathroom. Oh, big sis, you're just getting home. You're quite late today. Yes, I ended up drinking with someone I didn't know. My sister's eyes sparkled with curiosity as I mentioned this. What? Tell me more. Did you finally meet a nice guy? No, not really. The man was about the same age as Dad. Upon hearing the specifics, Mandy quickly lost interest. That's almost like entertaining a boss then. Sensing there was no interesting story to delve into, she went back to her room. While I told Mandy that he couldn't be a boyfriend, I started to realize that I was curious about him. A week passed without any contact from Tony, and then one Saturday morning, I received an email from him. If you're going out for drinks today, please let me join you. It read. Let's definitely meet up, I replied, and we decided to drink at the same place as before. That evening, after finishing work, I headed to the bar, and Tony was already there. Sorry for being late. No problem, I've just sat down myself. Again, Like last week, he listened to my troubles and I felt much better. But realizing I had been talking too much, I remembered my promise from last week. Last week, I promised to listen to you too, Tony. Don't hesitate. If you have any complaints, feel free to share them. Initially, he said he had nothing particular to talk about and preferred to listen. But there is a limit to how much one person can talk, so I encouraged him to share something. Well, I have a female subordinate, and it's hard to understand what young women these days are thinking. Tony shared a concern with me that I felt I could help with, even if just a little, and I listened attentively. In the flow of our conversation, I became curious about his age and profession, so I asked him. After some thought, he reluctantly answered, "Well, I do a bit of management, and I'm turning 58 this year. Probably around the same age as your parents, right?" I was surprised. My parents were a year younger than him. I worried if I had been disrespectful or rude in my drunken state, not knowing his age. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to rant and be disrespectful to someone so much older. And I didn't know you were a president. That must have been really troubling for you." "No, not at all. I was happy you spoke to me so freely, as if we were friends despite the age difference. And I dislike revealing my status because it makes people act reserved like now." Let's continue talking without worrying about that. Tony initially hesitated when I first asked about his job because he didn't want my attitude towards him to change after knowing. I decided that if Tony preferred not to talk about work, I would respect his wishes. After that, we became friends beyond the barrier of age, with me often doing most of the talking while Tony listened kindly with a smile. One day, after about a year of this drinking buddy relationship, Tony said he had something he wanted to talk about. It was rare for him to talk about himself, so I was intrigued. "Absolutely. Anything is fine. I'll listen if I can help." "Actually, I met someone I'm interested in." Seeing him blush as he spoke, I felt a pang of sadness. "Oh, she's very kind to me, bright, and a wonderful person." Tony praised her attributes to me. It started to become painful to listen. But then, he said something that made me burst into tears of surprise. "She's right here in front of me now." At that moment, my hands trembled a bit from joy as I asked him if he was serious. I expressed my genuine feelings and we decided to start dating. There's quite an age gap, like that between a parent and child. Is that okay? Tony was concerned about the age difference. Of course, age doesn't matter when it comes to love. I told him it didn't bother me, and he seemed relieved. From then on, instead of suggesting we go for drinks, he would ask me out on dates. It felt awkward at first, but now I feel we've gotten used to being a couple. Half a year into our relationship, Tony proposed. Though our dating period was short, we had known each other for quite some time. Knowing his character well, I gladly accepted. I had no objections to marrying him, but I wanted to submit our marriage registration on a specific date. So I'd like to submit our marriage registration on March 10th, 2 weeks from now. March 10th is also the anniversary of the day we met. Is it okay if we remain engaged until then? Of course, I'm not worried about the specifics. He agreed to my wishes. He also said he wanted to meet my parents. Your parents might be worried about me being so much older. I want to explain my feelings to them until they understand. Right. I want my parents to be convinced too. We agreed to discuss the schedule with my parents that night and then went our separate ways. I was nervous about how to explain it to my parents as I headed home. When I arrived home, my parents were already in their bedroom, so I couldn't talk to them. I decided to discuss it the next morning but was stopped by Mandy coming down to take a bath. Just got home? Uh, yeah. I hadn't told my parents yet about the proposal or that he would be coming to greet them, so I wanted to keep it hidden from Mandy for now. But Mandy was perceptive. Your face is all red. What's up? Did something happen with your boyfriend that has you so excited? I tried not to show it, but she guessed right and my shoulders twitched. Seeing that, Mandy began to smirk. Huh, haven't you told Mom and Dad yet? From my expression, she guessed the truth one after another. Embarrassed, I tried to change the subject. Enough already, go take your bath. I need to take one too. Hey, let me meet your boyfriend. She seemed amused and asked to meet him. I didn't want to introduce him just for her amusement and gently refused. Why? He's quiet and a complete opposite of you, Mandy. You might not enjoy it. Despite my words, Mandy persisted in wanting to meet him. But I thought it wasn't right to introduce him to her before my parents, so I firmly refused. Realizing my resolve, she didn't push further. The next day, I told my parents about him and discussed a time for him to greet them. They were very pleased and actively suggested available dates. Even after mentioning the age difference, they said they didn't mind if I was fine with it. I was truly grateful to have such understanding parents. However, Mandy, who had eavesdropped, exclaimed loudly, What? Your boyfriend is 58 years old? Is he that guy you met at the bar you mentioned before? That's not a boyfriend, that's a dad. It's none of your business, Mandy. Leave it alone. Saying this, I had her leave the living room. Then my mother asked when our next date was. It's this Friday night. We always promise to go out for drinks on Fridays. As we talked, I noticed a shadow move behind the frosted glass of the living room door. Mandy was probably eavesdropping again. I quickly checked the hallway, but she had already run off. Then, on the promised Friday, I headed straight to the bar after work. As I approached Tony, waving at him, he looked puzzled. Who is that woman? What? Oh! I followed you. Mandy had been waiting outside my office and followed me as I left. Go home right now. Aw, but I came all this way. Watching Mandy throw a tantrum, Tony, unfazed, smiled and said, Now, Katie, calm down. Since she's come all this way, why don't we all have a drink together? As per my fiancé's request, I couldn't just dismiss her. Tony must have felt compelled to agree even if he didn't want to. Yay! Thank you! Tony, I'm sorry about my sister. I'll scold her when we get home. I apologized several times, but Tony said it was okay and even made room for Mandy at the table. Then Mandy began to ask him all the questions I had hesitated to ask because I thought they might be rude. Tony, you're quite reserved, aren't you? Were your parents like that too? Yes, my parents were like that too. They have both passed away now, but it was a very strict household. I didn't know that Tony's parents had died. It was a bit of a shock to find out from Mandy and not from him directly. As I was reflecting on how I always talked and never really knew much about Tony, Mandy continued to uncover more. Do you have any siblings? I have one brother, but he moved overseas and we haven't been in touch for many years. All this was new to me. Mandy even managed to ask something I had long wondered about. By the way, what do you do for a living? I manage a business. Wow, are you a CEO? She was more eager in her questioning than I had been. Surprisingly, Tony, who had been reluctant to discuss his profession, answered her directly. I couldn't hide my astonishment. Perhaps because she's the sister of his fiancée, he answered honestly, fearing that keeping secrets might lead to opposition to our marriage. However, Tony didn't seem to be uncomfortable. He seemed genuinely pleased to be praised by Mandy, and to share about himself, I felt somewhat defeated. Sorry, I need to use the restroom for a bit. I said this to cool off and clear my head. After about 10 minutes, I felt calmer and returned only to find Tony and Mandy looking even closer and having fun. Ah, sis, welcome back. I was just reading Tony's palm, and guess what? He has a marriage line. That's great, isn't it? Mandy had touched his hand, making Tony blush a bit. I felt I couldn't sit with them any longer, and suggested we call it a night. What? We haven't even eaten yet, and it's only 8 p.m. Katie, are you feeling unwell? He was concerned about my health, but I responded coldly because I felt slighted. The atmosphere became awkward, but Mandy stepped in to suggest we wrap up for the day. Though we were supposed to go home together, Mandy said she was still hungry and decided to eat at another restaurant, so we parted ways separately. See you at home, sis? I went straight home without responding to Mandy. Lying on my bed, I reflected on my behavior today, acknowledging it wasn't great, and I drifted off to sleep. Then came the weekend of March 10th, the day to meet the parents. Tony and I tried to act normal despite the tension. In front of my parents, Tony managed to switch gears and responded well when they asked him to take good care of me. Yes, of course. He stumbled a bit in his response, which made me wish he had been more assertive, but I figured it might be due to nerves. The meeting with my parents went smoothly, and we moved on to discuss the marriage registration. Hey, Mom and Dad, can you sign the witness section? I want to submit the marriage registration today because I want our anniversary to be March 10th. I asked my parents to fill in the witness section, and we decided to go to the city hall that day. On the way there, Tony was looking down. What's wrong? Are you still upset about the other day? I'm sorry. I got jealous of Mandy and ruined our dinner. I wanted us to be smiling when we submitted the marriage registration. Realizing I might be the reason for his mood, I apologized. Tony quickly reassured me. Oh, no, sorry. I've just been dealing with some personal stuff these past few days. Sorry for worrying you. Relieved that it wasn't because of me, we were able to submit our marriage registration on our desired date. Now we're officially married. I'm so excited about our honeymoon around the world starting tomorrow. I can't believe you arranged it as a surprise, Tony. As I was getting excited, Tony's face turned pale. Concerned, I asked him what was wrong, and he suddenly knelt down. Katie, I'm sorry. What? What's wrong? His sudden apology shocked me. I asked him to lift his face since we were still near the city hall and in the middle of town. To avoid attracting more attention, we moved to Tony's house to talk. Once inside, he tried to kneel again, so I stopped him and demanded an explanation. Just apologizing won't help. What's wrong? Start by explaining. Tony asked for a moment to prepare his explanation. It seemed he needed time to explain properly. While waiting, I was left alone in his house. Feeling thirsty, I searched for a cup in the cupboard. That's when a crumpled letter peeked out from the back. I pulled it out, and the envelope bore shocking news. Frightened, I quickly put the letter back where I found it, abandoned the idea of having water, and sat down quietly. When Tony returned, the sound of the front door made my heart skip, but I tried to stay calm. Sorry, I had to step out suddenly. I actually need to call someone here for the explanation. You need to call someone here? Tony emerged from behind, followed by Mandy. Yo, big sis. Mandy? Why Mandy? I was completely confused, but ignoring my state, they came into the living room and started sitting next to each other. Seeing this, I began to feel a bad premonition. Then, Tony and Mandy looked at each other before starting to talk to me. Katie, I can't marry you after all. I've fallen in love with Mandy. Please, let's get a divorce. We had just submitted our marriage registration, yet here he was, talking about divorce, and I couldn't keep up with the situation. Mandy smirked at my speechlessness and said, Sorry, big sis. Tony likes me better than you, my plain sister. She said it with a scorn. Still unable to accept it, I questioned the recent pleasantness. Then why did you go greet my parents? What were you thinking when they were writing on our marriage registration witness section? I couldn't forgive Tony for trampling over the feelings of both me and my parents. Moreover, Tony was trying to marry me while keeping secrets. It seemed like Mandy didn't know about it. When I confronted Tony, his attitude changed dramatically. It can't be helped. You never asked me anything, Katie, and decided everything on your own. And all you ever did was complain about work, which wasn't fun at all. But Mandy, she looked at me with sparkly eyes, really interested in what I had to say. I thought I'd rather marry someone younger, cuter, and more charming. Tony made it sound like it was all my fault. True, I did most of the talking, but he had always listened with a smile. I wanted to retort, but I was so close to tears that I could only bite my lip to hold them back. Seeing me like this, Mandy had a triumphant look on her face. I'm sorry to your parents, but I realized I wanted to marry Mandy after we submitted the form at the city hall. Why? At the city hall, I had been on top of the world. To learn that Tony hadn't felt the same was deeply saddening. But the reason came out, and it was because of something Mandy said. It's because you realized we couldn't meet up, just the two of us anymore, right? What do you mean? It turned out Tony and Mandy had been going out for drinks without me knowing. Mandy thought they could continue to do so even after he married me, but she had set things up. I told him, if you marry my sister, we won't meet again. Then he immediately screamed, No, and started crying. That's when he realized he loved me more than you, right? Tony didn't look at me but nodded vigorously toward Mandy. At first I thought it was just a momentary lapse, but at the submission I thought about how this piece of paper would stop me from seeing Mandy. That's when I really decided I wanted a divorce. Tony continued with his terrible excuses. As I listened, I gradually stopped caring. Whatever. What? You realize you have no chance against me? You've always been understanding, big sis, she said, mocking me. But I felt no frustration, just a cold detachment as I looked at them. Huh, sis, so frustrated you can't even cry? Well, it said to divorce on day one of marriage, but being a CEO's wife was too much for you, huh? I think it suits me better, and it's for the best. I think Mandy loved the title of CEO's wife more than Tony himself. Considering this, Mandy seemed rather pitiful. I almost snorted in amusement, but held back and acted instead. Why Mandy over me? I'll divorce you, and I'll find someone better. Good luck with that. I think men will find a 30-year-old woman too much trouble to even date. But do try your best. We'll be going on the honeymoon around the world you and Tony had planned. I'll bring you a souvenir. So just wait and drool. I glared at Mandy in what I believe was a convincingly heartfelt performance. Then I submitted the divorce papers and went back to my parents' house. My mother hurried over to me when I arrived. Apparently, Mandy had called to inform them that she, not I, would be marrying Tony, and that they were heading off on a worldwide honeymoon. My parents were concerned about my feelings, however, I had no time for shock or sadness as I had research to do. After scouring the internet and reporting my findings to my parents, their attitude changed. Until a few days ago, I was seen as the poor sister whose husband was stolen by her younger sibling. Now they saw Mandy as the sister who would learn a painful lesson instead of me. My parents and I laughed together. They didn't worry about Mandy, considering it's a just punishment. A year later, Mandy and Tony returned from their global trip. They seemed thoroughly entertained and happy. It was amazing. Here, a souvenir keychain for you, big sis. She handed me a cheap keychain, likely bought in an American airport. Annoyed, I smiled, thanked her, and decided to reveal something. Thanks for the souvenir. Oh, by the way, Mandy, are you sure about your future life? Huh? What? Tony's face went pale as I hinted at something. Didn't know? Tony's not so great at managing his businesses. He's bankrupted several companies, and there's a rumor he's nearly $500,000 in debt. And his current company is barely scraping by. Being his wife, you'll have a hard time, won't you? I chuckled softly, looking at Mandy. At that time, I had discovered a demand notice at Tony's house. It included the name of Tony's company, so I searched online and found a flood of information about his past dealings. I discovered accusations from former employees and learned about Tony's mismanagement. When I shared this with Mandy, she froze completely, and a few seconds later, she began to question Tony in disbelief. What do you mean? You never mentioned this. People usually talk about these things before getting married, right? But Mandy, you never asked anything beyond the fact that I was a CEO. Besides, I'm not obligated to tell you everything. He insisted that it was Mandy's fault for being deceived. Mandy, who had been happily clinging to Tony just moments before, now completely flipped her attitude and screamed about getting a divorce. This is the worst. I'm getting a divorce too. What? Then you have to pay back half of what we spent on the honeymoon. I used the last of my money to win a lottery that paid for our trip, and it was supposed to be a 6-month trip. But because of your demands, it took a year. You owe me a substantial amount of money if you want to make this right. Tony also exploded with complaints against Mandy. Whether they divorced or not, my parents and I had nothing to do with it. My father told him to take their argument outside if they were going to continue. Eventually, after arguing all day, it was decided that Mandy would pay the travel expenses and they divorced. However, Mandy had always been a part-timer and couldn't come up with such a large amount of money. immediately. She came to our parents' house seeking help but was, of course, turned away. Too bad. Unfortunately, both mom and dad are on my side. We won't let you into the house anymore and we're cutting ties with you. If you don't leave soon, I'm calling the police. Don't say that. Help your poor sister who got deceived, big sis. Mandy pleaded in a pleading tone, her eyes tearful. But such tactics wouldn't work on me. You dare say that after you tried to steal my happiness? I won't talk to you ever again, and I'll ignore you if you come to the house. You're on your own now. So, good luck. Bye. I said this and ended the call on the door monitor. Mandy stayed ringing the bell and sitting in front of the house for a while, but due to the neighbor's stares, she eventually felt uncomfortable and left. Since then, I've had no contact with Mandy. A mutual friend once told me that Mandy is now living in a cheap apartment with rent less than $300. She's been saving money by working part-time, but during that time, she was also courted by a new man and got deceived again. She was lured into a dubious business, claiming she could make over $1,000 a day, and was swindled by the same man who invited her to invest. She seems destined to continue leading a tragic life without learning from her mistakes. I learned from the news on TV that the company Tony managed went bankrupt. Apparently, his existing debts have ballooned to the point where he will never be able to pay them off in his lifetime. Online articles about Tony were quickly compiled, and he was a hot topic for a while, receiving lots of backlash. Now, with a bad reputation in the banking and business community, he's unlikely to manage another company. Thinking about him having to work diligently to pay off his massive debt makes me laugh at the misery. I am determined to become happier than those two, and am currently visiting a matchmaking agency. There's a man I'm interested in, and I believe he could be the one. Mandy told me that women over 30 couldn't get married, but I want to prove her wrong. Just thinking that I will definitely lead a happier life than those two fills me with joy. I am determined to be happy no matter what.